Well, I think the mentors here did a wonderful job. Thank you very much for doing this today. I'm really excited to be here and being a part of the She Shares program. But I am really thrilled about our guest speaker today. Only the 10th woman in California history to be elected to statewide office, Betty Yee was sworn in as state controller in January 2015. As the Golden State's chief fiscal officer, she is responsible for crucial accounting, auditing, disbursement, and other fiscal oversight and reporting for the 7th largest economy in the world. Betty has over 30 years of experience in public service, specializing in state and local finance and tax policy. She previously served as Chief Deputy Director for Budget with the California Department of Finance and also served in senior staff positions for several fiscal and policy committees in both houses of the California State Legislature. But I think you all know that Betty also has a very long history of being committed to supporting other women across the state from diverse communities, especially those pursuing public service. She has volunteered for organizations that provide leadership training and mentoring, including the National Women's Political Caucus, California Women Lead, Emerge California, Emily's List, and the Women's Caucus of the California Democratic Party. And actually, I had a lot more notes. I could go on for hours about everything that Betty has done. It's amazing. And to interview this inspiring women, we of course, have the former Newsweek correspondent, Karen Breslow of the Dewey Square Group. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome State Controller Betty Yee and Karen Breslow.
So welcome, everybody. Thank you, Kathy. And first question, are you a Warriors fan?
I am. Absolutely.
How great was that?
Well, and actually, I think I need to turn this on. There you go. Can you hear me now? So how great it was to have a victory come home to our Golden State. But I remember the Warriors when they played originally in San Francisco growing up as a kid. So long-time fan. Long-time fan, yeah.
So aside from the Warriors, it was a historic week for the budget.
Yes.
And I'm curious for a controller to see that kind of budget passed and passed on time with social spending. What was it like for you, and what does it mean for you as controller?
Well, I think we are really, I hope, in a phase where we have leadership both in our legislature and certainly in the governor's office that who really care a lot about the stability of the state, and certainly the camaraderie that we've witnessed in terms of the legislature and the executive branch working together on getting this budget done is something that I hope is what the future portends. It is this kind of cooperative relationship that I think really gives the public a lot more trust and confidence in their government in terms of who's helping me mind the store for the state of California. And also, I believe the budget has integrity. Certainly a little bit extra spending for programs that have been so severely affected by the downturn, but not to the extent of where we're going to be worried about runaway spending going forward.
So it seems, would you say California is out of the woods at this point?
You know, I think California is in a period of some stability, and that's a good thing. We've had some years where you can travel up and down the state and just see what the impacts have been for so many California families still really trying to experience what the recovery feels like. And so from that perspective, I don't think it's out of the woods for many Californians. From the job creation perspective, from the perspective of looking at our revenues really coming in, exceeding projections, and our strong cash management position, we certainly are out of the woods for the moment. But we know we're going to see another downturn. So the question is, how are we going to plan for that? And how are we going to be very prudent about our spending so that we don't have really the practical experience of Californians being one of where they're on a roller coaster in terms of depending on services one year and maybe not seeing them the next year.
So I have a lot of questions about being a controller. I think it's a position that a lot of people may not fully be familiar with. And I was wondering if you could explain in shorthand what the controller does and why this is you sign all the checks, right?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
A big fat checkbook, yes.
You get a check from the state of California, it's got Betty E's signature on it.
That's right.
What does the controller do for
Sure.
the state?
So what I'd like to say, and this was, by the way, the $64 million question on the campaign. So really, no one knows what a controller really does. But the way that I like to describe it is it's the office that minds the store for the state of California. So essentially monitoring the revenues that are coming into the state, being sure that they are tracking with projections, being sure that we have enough cash to pay the bills for the state of California, being sure that our public dollars are not being subject to any kind of abuse or fraudulent activity. So our audit function will help us determine that. And really just general fiscal and financial oversight. So we prepare the financial statements for the state of California. We do the audits. We are responsible for payroll for over 250,000 state employees and California State University employees. And we also have broad policy reach in terms of the controller serving on a number of different boards and commissions. But I like to look at it in terms of this is where Californians can expect that there will be an operation that minds the store, so that we really, and part of my attraction to this office is that I think throughout all of state government, this is one place where we can have a lot of impact and hopefully elevating and restoring the public's trust and confidence in our government.
Now, growing up, you had some experience that prepared you to run the store for the state of California, as you put it. But I'm wondering, you grew up in Chinatown to immigrant parents. You've talked about that story, and I'm wondering if you could just paint a picture for us of your family and what your responsibilities were as the second oldest of 6 kids.
Sure. And these are very, very fond memories. And we didn't grow up in Chinatown, actually. My father came to the United States in 1933 at the age of 14 and essentially was kicked out of his home by his parents and family and encouraging him to come and seek a better life to be able to provide to his future bride. And my father and my mother were in a prearranged marriage and for their children. And when my father came to the United States, and certainly without any high level of educational attainment, no proficiency in English, apprenticed in the laundry business in San Francisco, Chinatown. And he eventually did open his own laundry and dry cleaning business with my mother in the west side of San Francisco, where I grew up among very few Chinese Americans. There were lots of Irish Catholic, Italian Americans, Greek Orthodox. It was a wonderful European melting pot. And that as with any family business, and particularly to immigrant parents, the children were their best employees. And so my job in growing up in the business was to really handle and translate for them around all of the financial transactions in the business. So I did the banking, I worked with tax agencies and other governmental agencies, and negotiated with vendors. And this is where I used to always feel a little bit of pressure negotiating with vendors because money was tight, and certainly, raising 6 children, what I had to do was just get the best price on zippers or a gross of buttons, because not getting the best price could mean that we were not going to have a carton of milk on the table for the week. And so I really learned the value of money very, very early. And really that whole experience, what that whole experience just really brought to light for me was not only just seeing the inner workings of a business and being able to negotiate and being good with numbers and the like, but really the experience of being a voice for someone. And today we look at this wonderfully diverse state of a lot of recent immigrants and probably more to come in the future. And my story, yes, it's unique to me, but the experience is going to be more common than not in terms of how we see Californians going forward.
Did you ever imagine growing up that you were going to enter politics? How did that happen?
If my father were still alive today, he would be highly discouraging me from even thinking about going into politics. However, if he were alive today, I would say, it's your fault, Dad. My foray into politics came at a very young age. I was 13 years old, and I always like to tell the story about my sitting down, because when I was 13 years old, I was tasked by the 4 Chinese American families in our neighborhood to attend a town hall meeting of the San Francisco Unified School Board to oppose the busing program that was going to affect my younger sister. And not because we opposed the goals of the busing program, but I was tasked by the 4 Chinese American families with support from a lot of other families in the neighborhood to essentially make a statement that we wanted the money that was going to be spent on the busing program to be directed towards improving the quality of schools throughout the city. That we Chinese American parents who are small business owners do not drive, and should there be an emergency that affects any one of our children, it would take us well over 2 hours on public transportation to go and pick them up. And so that was the statement that I made, and I remember making that statement, going back to my seat in the audience, and my knees were shaking. My knees are shaking now when I recall this story, because I was in the 8th grade. I mean, I was like trying to put the statement together, and it came out. But what that experience left me with was just this whole notion in that's just really guided my life, that I was a voice for someone. I was a voice for someone. And really that is kind of the essence of politics in my mind, is that when we think about the true essence of politics, about how it's about people, for people, by people, then we really all want to be sure that we are each engaging fully in our political system, that we're building a democracy where all voices are heard. And to the extent that some voices are missing or aren't heard, I think we as public officials need to recognize who they are and sometimes may have to act in their stead. But so that was my first foray into politics. And even though we didn't get the decision we wanted, my sister did just fine in the busing program, that was the impression that experience left in me.
Now, your parents had 6 children, ran a laundry and dry cleaning business, and managed to send all 6 of those kids to college.
Yes.
All of your siblings have university degrees, and I'm just wondering how they managed that.
It was tough. It was tough. But I saw, and we all did our part. We all sacrificed, but nothing compared to the sacrifice of my parents. And as I look back at my upbringing, they ran a laundry and dry cleaning business in a storefront. We all squeezed into a studio apartment when we grew up in the back of the business. I remember sharing a bed with 2 of my siblings, a sofa bed, growing up, sleeping for most of my time through elementary school. And I graduated to my own sofa when I went to high school. But we had bunk beds, but we all just made do. And there was a little separate sleeping area for my parents so they could have some privacy. But that was our existence. And in terms of what our lives were like, I mean, I don't think I tasted American food for the longest time until I was in high school, but pretty much what we ate were, my discovering fried egg sandwiches became like such a big deal because I never had an egg, and to this day that's one of my favorite comfort foods is a fried egg sandwich. But it was just a very, very different lifestyle, but one where we never felt a day in any of the days that I grew up that we were poor, because I felt we were rich in values. And because of that, I think I look today at kind of the excesses of our society, and I look at how, so much of what drives society is money, 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 and frankly, one of the ills that I feel of society now that's really penetrated our political systems is that we've gone away from really focusing on our values as a society.
You grew up in this very tight family. You went to kindergarten not even speaking English.
No.
And you made your way
I did.
through the educational system.
I did, yeah.
So how does that inform, as a policymaker and as a public leader, how do you see funding public education and creating a path for immigrants to contribute in the ways that your parents may have never dreamed for you?
Yeah. A couple of things. And certainly we celebrate the diversity in this state. But it certainly has added some complexities in terms of how we provide services in California today. And what I would say, particularly with respect to the educational system, I think what is so important is early childhood support. And I was lucky to be in a very supportive environment growing up, but that's not the experience of a lot of children, and particularly for children where parents are absent because they're working multiple jobs and don't have that kind of support at home. And so this early childhood support and certainly early childhood education is very, very important. And I'm just happy to see that those issues are getting elevated in prominence, not only at the state level, but on the national front as we look at some of our presidential candidates starting to weigh in on issues like this. So I think that's critical. And particularly if we all believe that public education is really a gateway to success and to attaining our individual potential. And then the other thing I would say is, there are, in my situation, in terms of just learning English, And I shared the story before we walked in, but I actually learned English watching game shows during the summer at home. My parents were running the business, and if I wasn't needed, I'd be in the back watching television. And what else was on? The game shows during the day, or soap operas, which I didn't understand. And but this was my upbringing. I mean, that was how I learned English. And to this day, Jeopardy's still my favorite game show. But it's I think a lot of it also has to do with what we expose our young people to, right? And so, and I think there are really responsible partners in our media that have been doing great work in terms of trying to engage our young people. But frankly, there are alternative sources of media that haven't done all that great of a job and really haven't taken on that responsibility of trying to fill that void in terms of early childhood development. And so I hope we see a lot more of that going forward.
I want to talk a little bit about how you went from being good with numbers and helping to run the family business to seeking elective office. And that's something that I think for so many women, no matter how talented they are, no matter what they've achieved in their business or professional lives, how do you make the leap to running for public office, to just waking up one day and saying, I'm going to put my name out there and I'm going to let people vote on whether or not I get my job?
One, you have to love your job really a lot, and the work that you do, which I do. I'll say this, and that is, it's a decision I think unique to each of us as women. And in the world of women in politics, you hear oftentimes that women have to be asked to run. And I think that's true. I think that's true in this current culture of where politics has pretty much been defined, from a male cultural dynamic. My hope is that as more women are leading and running and serving in high levels of office, that we can change that culture a little bit. Because my strong belief is that each of us has something to bring to the table. And it's not measured by how much money you raise or how much is in your bank account. It's about what your personal experiences have been and where your expertise is. And I think that's a cultural change that we can hope to see when more and more women are elevating into elective office. The other thing I will say is, for me, and this is a true story, I never thought I would run for office. I really like being behind the scenes. I like solving problems. I like just really given the challenge and go off and kind of find the problem. I was perfectly happy just spending time in a corner with fooling around with a spreadsheet and never seeing the light of day. But when I left the Davis administration after having served during his first 4-year term, I really was in an assessment phase in my life. I love the work that I do. I wouldn't have traded any of my experiences for the world. But I also thought that I really missed that touch with people, that there wasn't kind of direct impact. And so I at that point, really had thought about going back and getting my teaching credential and teaching 8th grade English, which had such a big impact in my life. And when you think about middle school age children, it's such a transition time for young people, and I just wanted to be part of that development. And so I took time to serve as the Chief Deputy to now retired State Senator Carol Migden at the Board of Equalization, to just think about what I wanted to do next. And immediately people were speculating that I would succeed her on that board. I said, what are you talking about? I said, she's only going to serve half her term and run for a state Senate seat. And I said, well, you've got to be crazy. I've never run for anything in my life. So I'm just here to assess what I'm going to do when I grow up. And as it was, people kept coming to me and saying, you need to think about doing this. So what I actually did was I looked around to see what the landscape looked like. Mm-hmm. And I started to see who was interested in the position. I just decided one day, damn it, I can do it better than they can. And just decided, look, if I don't go for it, I won't know what it's like. So I consulted my higher power, my mother, who was just so wonderful. And by the way, she's 92 years old and still lives in San Francisco in the house that I grew up in. And so I'm just really so grateful to her, being such a pillar of strength to me. But so my higher power tells me, don't have any regrets. Just go for it. You don't want to look back, 10 years later and to have to say, I wonder what would have happened if. Mm-hmm. Just go for it. You've been supporting other elected officials for so long. You're going to find your own voice, that voice again, about how to do this for yourself. So just go for it. And I stayed pretty true to that. I mean, it was It was the campaign for the Board of Equalization. It's not a typical campaign. You represent a quarter of the state. There's no ground campaign. So I've worked on campaigns. I think a lot of us in this room have. So there's no field operation. There's no really anything you have to do to run for the seat except raise money and mail out stuff for people to see about what you're all about, and you turn out the vote. And so in some ways, it was the easiest election that you could have probably been in. So I won my seat on the Board of Equalization. I loved the work. For a long time, I had been doing fiscal and finance policy work that was all about learning a little bit about everything. So, it was this broad, about this deep. And to be able to just immerse myself in tax policy, I was like a kid in a candy shop. So it's been a very rewarding journey.
So you mentioned getting money to run a campaign, and
Yeah.
that I've talked to a lot of women candidates, or a
Yes.
lot of would-be women candidates, and that seems to be just the line that very few women can cross. How did you learn to ask for money?
It is tough. The way that I made it work for me is that I just recognize if you want to do this badly enough, it's going to be part of what you got to do. And so I just become kind of a different person, almost like a machine. I just forget that I'm like a person, and you just kind of cabin yourself off for however much time, and you get on the phone and call. I like the meetings one-on-one, but frankly, those don't generate money until you make the ask. And so, but the ask in person actually is good because I like that connection. But the calling, it's just what you have to do to get elected. So I just become kind of a different person, but just knowing that to reach the goal that I want to reach, this is such an essential part. And I will say that the experience was a little, I won't use too tough of a word, but it wasn't the most confidence-boosting experience. Let's put it that way. And I think this is true for other women candidates with whom I've spoken about this, and that is we don't ask once. We have to ask 3, 4, 5, 6 times before we're taken seriously. Mm-hmm. And if we're measured by the dynamic right now in politics that I described earlier about how much is already in your bank account that suggests that you're viable, then a lot of women don't ever get a start. And so I think a lot of it is just staying with it, people seeing your tenacity, that you're serious about it, and that you're just going to keep to your goal. And eventually, supporters will come along. But it did take, I have to say, it gets a little demoralizing sometimes when you have to ask 5, 6 times over. But you just keep at it and just let people know that you're serious about this.
What's the toughest thing that ever happened to you on the campaign trail?
On a campaign trail, toughest probably, practically speaking, toughest being away from home for long periods of time. I mean, just from a very practical level, not having kind of my sanctum that I can kind of go back to, and living out of hotels or living in a car, probably most of the time just driving up and down the state, but not feeling like I could ever get rebooted or to get grounded again before I have to go back out. So I think the time commitment was very, very tough. At the same time, still really performing a full-time responsibility as a member of the board. So that, I say, would be the toughest. And I think for any of us who are in elective office, it remains tough even after you're in office because there's so much that you want to do, so much that you want to get accomplished. But that's why then you get like a really good team of people to surround you. And I'm happy that I have a number of members of my senior team here, and the majority of whom are women who serve in my administration. And so, but they're here today. But this is the support that really any of us need to be able to find that balance.
And who have been the women who've supported you at various points in your life? Who are your mentors?
Mm-hmm. So 2 that I can speak about very fondly. Many of you know now retired State Senator Carol Mignon. Many of you know her with the reputation that she carries. And I will say that it was really reputation and all from her that I learned a lot. For me, she is someone who was really always true to her word. She meant what she said, and she said what she meant, and no kind of sugarcoating about anything that Carol Mignon says. But at the same time, I learned a tremendous amount from her, that your word is gold in this business, and that your reputation and your word is really, at the end of the day, all you have. And you live up to that and never cross anyone because of that. And but also as a woman mentor. I mean, this is really the ultimate in terms of a woman supporting a woman. When I first decided to run, and she encouraged me to run, and everything that she really had built up over her own political life was imparted on me, but understanding that I had my own style, that I was my own person, and so there was just a healthy respect for my, doing it my way, and so I will always appreciate that. The second mentor who's really guided my work and continues to do so today, and really my larger work in terms of my ongoing community involvement and women's leadership development, is someone who I didn't have the opportunity to meet before she passed away, and that is the late Congresswoman from Hawaii, Patsy Mink. And particularly all of the women in this room have a tremendous debt that we owe Patsy Mink for having been the architect of Title IX. And what she did in getting Title IX enacted to swing open the doors to higher education for women, to athletics and to sports participation by women and girls is just nothing short of remarkable, given the time that she did that. And she was the first Asian American woman elected to our Congress, and her personal experience guided that work. And she saw and experienced discrimination firsthand, trying to get into law school, to medical school. Saw her father being passed up for promotions as a very accomplished civil engineer to his white counterparts, and she decided she was going to do something about that. But when you think about, here's this woman from Hawaii back in Congress just trying to get Title IX passed. How did she do it? And it was her own personal story, and she just went member to member to member, and one after another just told her story. And what resonated was the fact that everyone that she had spoken to had experienced some sort of discrimination in their lives. And so one of the things that she's left, which I think has been, a great legacy, and certainly are words that I, really think about every single day, and that is we need to see what we want to accomplish in life and in our country based on our own personal experiences, so that we can be sure that no other person experiences the same discrimination that we did. And when I think about that, it really is a purpose. It's a purpose for why we serve. When we think about struggles like the women's movement and other kinds of struggles, we hope that at the end of those struggles, it means that it's an easier time for those who follow us in terms of being able to reach their goal. And sorry to say that, really in the women's movement, we still have a long ways to go.
Have you experienced discrimination, either as a Chinese American or as a woman making your way up?
I had probably less experiences of discrimination as a Chinese American, which is really kind of interesting when I think about this. And it's an interesting question because, in the neighborhood where I grew up and as a young person, I felt very supported. My family felt very supported. And in fact, not only did I have two parents, but every customer of my parents were surrogate parents. And so I had to do well in school, or I'd hear it from a whole host of people. But it is one where I didn't experience discrimination growing up as an Asian American. I experienced a great deal of discrimination as a woman in my professional life. And particularly in the world of finance, where I think women aren't taken all that seriously. And I like to think that as we have more women who are serving in prominent roles in public finance, and many of them are in this room today. I mean, I look at the work that Ann Stoswell is doing as heading up CalPERS, and looking at all these great leaders who have just really elevated to serve in these really awesome, responsible roles. I'd like to think that discrimination will be a thing of the past, but it certainly is something that I think as more women are serving, we can help change that culture. And by the way, it's nice that we're going to be on a $10 bill, but that isn't going to cut it all the way.
Who's your choice?
Very good question. I'm thinking about that one, but
Okay.
I'll register it on
we'll
hashtag the new 10.
Yeah, do that. Okay, we should have a She Shares survey.
There you go.
Just see what we think. Women running for public office face special scrutiny about all the choices they make, whether they have children, who's minding your children. If you don't have children, why did you sacrifice that to run for public office? How do you deal with these questions, and how many of them do you hear? You've traveled the state.
Yeah.
What do you hear, and how do you deal with it?
I hear a lot of it, and particularly in my situation where I don't have children. I come from a big family, And shoot, I'm Chinese American. I'm supposed to have like lots of kids, right? And so, but this was something that I experienced a great deal on the campaign trail. And it became awkward moments at times, really probably for the person posing the question more than for me, about, who, or how are your children, experiencing this campaign? Are they being accepting? And I would tell them, I don't have children, but I'm living my life fulfilled, and this is what I really want to devote my life to. And as I think about this, it's still very much, I think about kind of just the whole perception of women and girls. And I think about it from the perspective of when girls are born, we're just kind of, we're expected to fit into this mold. And unfortunately, the mold being highly sexualized as we, kind of move through the spectrum of life. But of fitting into these roles, into this mold of what we're supposed to be. And so I take it as an opportunity to really try to present myself as a wholesome, fulfilled, kind of worthy woman who doesn't have children, but who has been a great, I think, non-parent adult role model to my 7 nieces and nephews. And I love children. I would do anything for them. I think they're the greatest gifts. And frankly, children is what really gives me purpose to do the work that I do. And so it is a time to really, hopefully, project and to put out a perception and a perspective about what it means to be fulfilled and not having to be a parent.
We're going to get to audience questions in just a minute, but I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you hope to accomplish as controller. I've heard you talk about a pretty big agenda, and we don't often think, we think of somebody minding the books.
Yes.
But you have a much bigger agenda.
We do, yes, the office does, and I do. The controller sits on, or has a seat on 78 boards and commissions, streamlined down from 82. And
I hope that was your work.
Yes, that was our first order of business, streamlining. And, but it covers just a whole range of policy areas. Obviously, the financial oversight, non-oversight functions, but also important policy areas like public pensions and taxation, environmental policy, health policy, affordable housing. So it's a broad reach on these various boards and commissions. My agenda is really pretty simple, but they're just daunting challenges. And but I think it requires really not just my office, but many of my partners in government to work together on these. So I want to actually put my emphasis on 3 different areas. One, it's been a lot, and you're going to continue to read a lot more about our public pension systems. And I'm actually very proud to be serving as a fiduciary member of the board at CalPERS and at CalSTRS as well. And I see Richard Koskin, one of my colleagues on the board here. But we take our role very, very seriously. And our charge is to be sure that we have enough to pay the benefits to our members and beneficiaries. Pretty simple. When you think about all that's affecting the fund, potentially, and the issues that are just affecting us as a society generally, you begin to then think about just how do you maintain that kind of fiduciary responsibility, and at the same time give due consideration to a lot of the pressures and a lot of the issues that are going to affect the performance of our investments. And so, but this is an area that I have personally been spending a lot of time in because I do believe that our public workforce, public sector workforce, and our educators deserve to have retirement security. They've earned it. We're entrusted with their earnings in part to get good returns, and we'll continue to do that. But within that work, there's a lot to do with respect to how we deal with issues of corporate governance, with respect to environmental stewardship, and you look at how we're all experiencing already the effects of global climate change. And the way that I view this in terms of the pension funds is that who we are doing business with, who we are investing in, are experiencing the exact same thing that we're all experiencing with respect to global climate change. But how is it affecting their business planning and decision? And I'd like to kind of know that because we've seen some instances of where companies are really more interested in the short term and not necessarily in the long term. I did decide to be vocal about the issue of the share buyback mechanism that companies are using, where with buying back shares to not necessarily put it back and investing in their companies, but to benefit a few at the top of their companies. And it couldn't have been more dichotomous in terms of workers on the street protesting for a $15 an hour wage. And here we've got, McDonald's essentially engaging in a share buyback mechanism. And so when you look at things like that, I just feel like there's a responsibility to call that out. And I do that on my own, not on behalf of the board on which I sit. But I think for me, how we're going to actually get through some of these daunting challenges is that we all have to be moving in the same direction and really wedded to the same goals about being able to provide for who we're responsible for. So it's definitely the public pension plans. I am leading an effort in comprehensive tax reform. We appointed a council last month of 9 members who will be working in a nonpartisan way of essentially vetting all of the various tax reform proposals so that at the end of the day, I believe that lawmakers and members of the public can begin to frame their own perspective about how to think about them. So you can imagine with 9 members coming from different disciplines, some from academics, some from who are economists by trade, some are doing work in economic development, business investment, that they were delighted when we told them that you're not expected to come to consensus about any reform proposals, but we need your smarts in terms of informing us about how this will affect you. Because I don't know about you, but as a voter, and as someone who votes pretty often, well, every time I vote, and I pick up a voter guide, I don't even understand half of what I'm reading, and I work in this area. And so what we can do in terms of just distilling it down to why it matters to people, how it's going to affect them, and I think can be an important role that we serve. And then lastly, as I talked about with global climate change, I don't think any of us can not really take on some responsibility as individual Californians with respect to doing our part to hopefully turn the direction of some of the effects that we're seeing from global climate risk. Will have huge economic impact, and so I think a lot of this is really just identifying what those are, certainly addressing some of these with respect to my work on the State Lands Commission and some of the coastal and ocean bodies going forward.
I think that was a good overview. Before we turn to audience questions, we have a She Shares tradition. We go through 10 rapid-fire questions. In the interest of time, I'm going to make it 5 today.
Okay.
But just quick answers. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Teaching.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Eliminating all hatred in the world.
If you could describe yourself in 3 words, what would you choose?
Oh boy, describe myself in 3 words.
Yeah.
Okay. Open, compassionate, and focused.
And lastly, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
18-year-old self. Go for it. There are no do-overs.
Great advice. Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions. Let's see, Hong has the microphone. And if you have a question, just raise your hand, let us know who you are, and fire away.
Hi there. Are we on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi there. I'm Olivia.
Olivia.
I introduced myself
Yep.
earlier as a member of the mentorship program. You spoke earlier with us about how it's difficult to get millennials to work in the state government, and I think that's because, well, in my experience, it's regularly painted as very unstable, especially as synonymous with the economy being unstable. I was wondering if you could comment on that and how. To what degree those sort of claims are truths or not, both like politically unstable or also economically unstable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I still regard state government as being a tremendously stable place to work. One of the drawbacks is that we aren't necessarily the most competitive with respect to compensation with our local government partners and also with the private sector. But I do think, particularly now when we have a very, very seasoned workforce, really not a lot in that middle kind of, section, and then a lot of new talent coming into state government. there are some wonderful opportunities in state government, and particularly in the fiscal and financial field. And the other thing I would say is, I think just remain open. What you do at the beginning of your career in state government may not be what you end up doing, down the road. And it's one of the things that I always tell young people, because I don't think you can chart life. You can't chart a career just as you can't chart life, to the finest detail. And I think there are tremendous opportunities. And I just talked about some of the challenges that we're facing in the state, and government's going to have a role in each of them. And so as you look at coming in and really trying to hone a discipline, and I like the financial and fiscal area because that's going to drive everything, right? Everything we do is going to relate to money in some way. And so, and to have really experience in that field, even better to have decision makers at the table with that discipline, and particularly who are women, who tend to have a broader view about what we're solving, not just the problem at hand, but really broader impact. I think it's a great thing. It's a great thing. So I would say that the stability is stronger than you think it is. And we welcome young talent. We really do welcome young talent. Yeah.
Over here.
Hi, Ian Marshall with AT&T. In looking back, especially after you enter into, the campaign trail, especially things can get pretty ugly with, whether or not accusation or, the comments that people make to you. Did you ever question whether or not you still want to continue on?
Yeah, that's a great question. No. I think when I made my decision that I was going to run, there was no looking back. And frankly, there was no looking on either side of me either. Because you just have to stay focused. And part of what really drove me to do this is that I really believed I could do this well. And I had understood the world of politics and certainly had seen many for whom I've served go through some rough campaigns. And but I also believed in the goodness of people. And it's something that I really, truly do believe in. As I was traveling up and down the state and really understanding why people weren't engaged in our democracy and why people were so cynical about politics, it's no wonder because of what they're fed every day. I mean, it's like, look at whether it's their local political leadership not being responsive to what they're seeing with respect to national politics on the news. And so I think one of the greatest gifts that I had during my campaign, and I do need to just call out Stephen Jacobs, who was with me during the campaign, we went to every community and just had dialogues like this. And I didn't care if there were 5 people in the room or if there were 20. It made my campaign consultant crazy, because this is not how you run a statewide campaign. It's how Betty Yee ran a statewide campaign. Because at the end of the day, I want to know that I did my part to further and expand participation. And how do you do that without a conversation like this? Without an investment of time to let people know that you have every right to be part of this democratic process. And frankly, for me, the reward was for me. The stories that we heard, and I just want to quickly share this, but there were 2 questions that in every community that we went into, and a lot of communities I didn't know a lot about. A lot of poor communities, a lot of communities that had not been so engaged. But 2 questions that I always ask, and I wish I could have chronicled this, and we've talked about doing this, in each community. And one is, to each person, tell us about a time when you stood up for someone. When you think about it, we've each been advocates for another. And when I think about politics, it's kind of what we do. There are some professional advocates, those of you who lobby. There are those who serve in elective office, and we try to be representative of all the voices in our district. But the stories that we heard about what people have done to stand up for what they believe in, whether it's for a sibling or for someone in the workplace, for a parent who was aggrieved, it was amazing. And then the second question I would ask is one where it really gave people a sense that they had a stake in this, and that is, what are your hopes and dreams for your children? And if you don't have children, what is your vision of the world for the generation to come? And again, just some very, very wonderful stories, and a lot of it based on people's personal experiences and what their daily lives were about. So I feel like I have a really good compass about what California is all about and who I'm representing, because you just learn so much about them when they were able to share that. And so to your question, no, I never felt like there was a dark day. As I said, the darkest day was really not having been home 3 weeks in a row on the road. That got tiring. But I think the people of California buoyed me, and really what was even more heartening is that there's a lot of goodness around us. There really is. And I think the more that we can really bring that out in people and really get back to understanding that we're bound by some common values, just think about the great possibilities of what can happen in solving some of these daunting challenges that we have.
I think we have time for one last question.
Oh, I'm loud enough. Hi, Betty.
Hi.
Angie Masaki.
Yes.
I see you as governor of our great state. Have you and would you consider a run in the future?
Yeah, the one thing you learn in politics is that the word never doesn't exist, right? I'm going to say this. No one wants to be governor if our fiscal house isn't in order, okay? But this has been my discipline. I'm certainly keeping an open mind, but I just want to do a good job here. There's so much to do. And when I think about, and Governor Brown's been doing a great job in elevating a lot of these issues as well, his work won't be done by the time he leaves office. And so the question then will be, where can I be in the best position to further some of these goals that have been that have begun to be addressed? And I think really the financial fiscal aspect of everything that we do in public policy are some of the most important decisions that we make. And to be able to continue to do that would be a tremendous privilege in this current role or in some other role.
I'm going to translate that to watch this space. That's all the time, all we have time for today. I want to thank our guest controller, Betty Yee, and to all of you for being here today and supporting She Shares. And thanks to the hardworking crew at the Dewey Square Group and Lucas Public Affairs for producing today's event. And also an exciting bit of news, our next event will be our guest will be UC President Janet Napolitano.
She's terrific.
And that'll be September 9th. So you'll be getting news about ticket sales for that event, but you'll want to be sure to be here for that. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.